AI is taking over, making much of what big consulting firms do as redundant. Are they in trouble? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Dave is Not AI, the channel where we take a critical, no-nonsense look at artificial intelligence. I'm Dave Linthicum, an AI expert with over 30 years of experience in the enterprise AI field, and I'm a top AI influencer and thought leader. Here we examine what works and what doesn't, providing honest and objective analysis. If that interests you, please subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started. So this is a question I get a lot. In other words, if AI is going to be proliferating everything out there, what are the consulting firms going to do? Because many of them, they can be made redundant by much of what generative AI and agentic AI can do in terms of business process automation and business analysis and, some stuff that we normally are used to paying the big consulting firms many millions of dollars for these engagements, and they've been dependent on it, many of them for the last 150 years. So are they about to get disrupted? And I think aspects of this we're going to need to pay attention to. With our other aspects, there may be a bit of a Chicken Little going on, but let's look at what is going to be the impact of AI on big consulting. So as artificial intelligence moves from the laboratory to the center of business strategy, consulting firms are facing unprecedented disruption. Corporate clients are rapidly embracing AI-powered analytics, automation, and decision-making tools, enabling them to generate insights and implement strategies that once required external expertise. And so LLMs, at the end of the day, they're built with the whole of the knowledge of the universe, and they basically went out there and learned everything they could in terms of information was available on the internet. And in many cases, consulting firms are just basically providing the same sort of stuff. In other words, they're able to organize their analysis around existing data to make recommendations as to what businesses should do, how they should build systems, how they should acquire different companies, how they should build out different technologies, things like that. And obviously has a huge amount of value for the Global 2000 if they're able to make the correct decisions based on some of the advice from the big consulting firms. But now that advice is kind of commoditizing. Much of what we were dependent on consulting firms for doing, just 3-4 years ago, can be automated directly from the utilization of generative AI, specifically the LLMs that are out there. Not only the LLMs at the raw prompts, but the ability to automate existing accounting, analysis tools, inventory control, supply chain logistics information, things like that, through these AI-enabled versions of the tools, which really kind of allow you to have a consultant there, which is just a press of a button away. And in many cases, it's going to be more valuable to you because the access is always going to be there. And that's what the consulting firms are facing right now. How do they live in that world, and how does their existing business exist? So as a recent McKenzie global survey notes, organizations are beginning to create the structures and the processes that lead to meaningful value from generative AI, with more than 3/4 now using some form of AI in at least one business function. The impact is particularly pronounced among large companies, which are changing more quickly than smaller organizations and fundamentally redesigning workflows as they deploy AI solutions, often reducing their dependency on outside consultants in the process. So this is affecting the large organizations out there more so than the smaller organizations. Obviously, the smaller organizations typically can't afford the big consulting organizations, but the large Global 2000 companies can, and there normally is a pre-existing relationship that goes back decades, sometimes 100 years, where the partners basically coexist with the executives, and they outsource much of the decision making, to these consulting organizations. So, whether it's cloud computing, utilization of AI, supply chain logistics, economic indicators, accounting services, things like that. And I think that's quickly becoming diminished because as I'm finding my day-to-day life, and I'm sure you're finding your day-to-day life, we can outsource a lot of things that we used to do or require a service to do, which the AI systems are perfectly capable of doing. They're a lot less expensive, sometimes free, And they're able to do a good job, if not a better job, because the fact of the matter is that they can pay attention to millions of different variables at the same time, when humans can only pay attention to a few dozen at the same time. So if you're trying to solve a problem in the context of the current economic situation, in the context of your current market conditions, in the context of looking at the patterns of success that occurred in the last, say, 50 years, that have been stored out on the internet and used as training data for some of these LLMs, you're typically going to have a better outcome with AI, and definitely a cheaper outcome with AI. And I think many of the organizations out there are figuring that out, and they're looking at what the consulting firms are doing as redundant. And so they're not necessarily going to get rid of them, but I think they're going to need a lot fewer services. And the consulting firms, by impact, are going to make less money. So disruption of traditional consulting models is really, going to be where this stuff is going. Big consulting firms historically thrived on providing proprietary frameworks and industry expertise. However, as clients adopt powerful AI tools, they are increasingly able to generate insights internally, eroding the need for traditional consulting services. So this is very much like we just talked about earlier. So in other words, they're going to find the AI services more convenient and more available, and definitely more cheaper to use. And that's going to be, I think, the death knell for many of these organizations and these consulting firms. Certainly if you're doing something like auditing and you're doing something like business analytics and things like that, where much of what you do is not necessarily complex business processes, and they can be audited because they can be automated. Obviously, you need a great deal of expertise, and that's why we have CPAs and attorneys and things like that. But much of that expertise can be simulated, through the use of AI, and we figured that out a while ago. So organizations that are providing information processing services, they're really kind of the analysis of massive amounts of information to come to different conclusions, including legal and accounting, and other, management consulting kind of roles. It's going to be better done with AI. Not only going to get better results, but it's going to be much cheaper. And I think that we also don't have to deal with the differences in quality of services depending on who the consulting firms send us. Sometimes they send you, very talented people with lots of expertise to do an amazing job, and sometimes you don't get the best and the brightest. In fact, many times what these consulting firms will do, they'll send you the best and the brightest in order to close the deal. And then suddenly, once the deal's closed, suddenly you're dealing with the 20-somethings who just recently graduated from college that end up doing the work. And that's kind of how they have to make money. So I understand why they're doing it, but that's even more of a reason not to use them. So the big consulting clients out there are becoming what we call self-service innovators. So these clients can access AI-powered analytics, process automation, and even strategic planning systems without relying on consultants. And so this self-service capability means clients expect consultants will deliver more specialized, high-impact solutions rather than routine analysis. So they're making the consultants actually, move up the stack a bit. So instead of doing the low-level business work, which is their bread and butter, that's how they're getting paid. That's where they start booking the hundreds and hundreds of hours that they, do to get audits or help you with, management consulting problems or IT automation problems, things like that. And they're going to be abstracted up to allowing them to make more higher-level decisions. In many cases, the consulting firms themselves are going to need to utilize the AI tools, understanding that much of what they used to in the past is going to be automated, and they're the ones that are going to be driving the tools on behalf of the clients. So they're also going to have to show, some sort of savings according to that. In other words, if I'm working for a consulting organization and I'm using AI tools to come up with the valuable insights that I'm supposed to give my clients, there should be fewer consultants, and the bill should be much smaller, maybe 10% of what we used to bill in the past. So I'm not saying we're going to eliminate people altogether out of these consulting organizations. I think there are going to be organizations of people at the end of the day. I just think we're going to need way fewer people to do what they've done in the past. So the pressure within the consulting firms is to upskill and redefine value. So consulting companies are under immense pressure to upskill their workforce in advance of AI competencies, basically to build AI skill sets. Only by pivoting to become trusted guides in AI adoption and implementation can these firms avoid obsolescence and maintain relevance. So they're racing like crazy, trying to be a couple of things. Number one, to try to build their skill sets in AI, and everybody is, learning AI, probably on the flights out to, meet with the clients because everybody's so busy, and learning AI capabilities and skill sets, AI architecture, AI utilization, and what AI means to particular verticals, healthcare, retail, finance, things like that. And they're probably getting pretty good at it. Normally, it's very smart people who work at these firms. The problem is that they're going to have to go through the same sort of a learning curve as many of their clients are going through. And so the client's going to realize that. So in other words, if everybody's moving to learning to AI, why am I hiring these people, to learn AI on my dime? And so we kind of have to consider the fact that our ability to reskill ourselves is going to be extremely important to get advantage of some of the AI opportunities that are out there, whether a consulting firm or a Global 2000 company. But again, it's going to commoditize the people that we need. We're just going to need fewer people to do it. And I think if you understand how AI works and its ability to automate things that are typically going to be commodity now, analysis, things like that, accounting, then many of those skill sets are going to be needed, but we need fewer people that have them. So I think that the end result of this is going to be a significant reduction in the workforce that the consulting firms are going to have to put forward. So they're going to shrink, and I think it's a matter of time. It's probably going to happen over the next 5 years. It's something that's not going to happen over the next few months, but ultimately their jobs are going to be changed, and their jobs are going to mean fewer people who are billable. So next would be commoditization of consulting offerings. So AI and machine learning have commoditized many consulting offerings, especially those related to data analysis and reporting. So as an article in Harvard Business Review observes, routine consulting work is increasingly being automated, pushing firms to focus on innovation and transformation services. So again, the focus for this consulting firms is going to have to be on the high-end strategic aspects of it. In other words, making the core decisions and helping executives, figure out which companies to buy, which companies to sell, which product lines to launch, things like that. Very important decisions, but they're going to commoditize everything else. So the analysis, in order to get to the right decision, is going to be extremely easy and extremely cheap compared to what it was just 5 years ago. And in many instances, I think the clients themselves are going to figure out how to do a self-service approach to this. In other words, they're going to realize pretty quickly that the consultants are using the same tools they're using and coming up with the same answers. So why do you need the consultants? So I think client expectations and the competitive landscape is changing significantly. So clients now expect consultants not only to understand AI, but also to integrate and deploy it rapidly within their organizations. The competitive landscape is intensifying as boutique firms, small consulting organizations, and tech companies offer AI-powered solutions, forcing traditional consulting giants to adapt quickly or risk losing market share. So that kind of sums it up. So I think the organizations, the consulting organizations out now are really kind of struggling to figure out what their role is going to be in 5 years. And, one aspect of it, I think they can buck the trend and, talk about how consulting is not a human, and which is true. And it's very, difficult for an AI-based system to come up with some sort of innovative and creative idea. That's also true. We talk about that here all the time. The role of the humans is not going to be eliminated entirely, but how we function in a business and what we can automate using AI is going to change significantly. We see it today. In other words, every accounting tool and every customer relationship management system and every general ledger system, things like that has AI tied to it. And in many cases, you kind of have a consultant, which is a click away. And so everything is AI enabled. So if everything is AI enabled, it's allowing us to make decisions using our own data and do so in a commoditized and very much convenient way than it was just 5 years ago. So I've always questioned the role of some of these consulting firms in terms of their ability to provide value to the businesses. Many times I don't think they're as valuable as they think they are. I think that they are going to be a service that's needed to augment some of the expertise that the business may not have. But moving forward, they're going to be less and less of a need in the market for these services. And it's probably time that they figure out how to shift over to another model. And I think that's going to be a very difficult thing to do because obviously the other models, if you're dealing with human services, is going to be impacted by AI as well. And the AI stuff is getting really good at replicating the expertise of humans. So don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also, check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog and my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course, my generative AI architecture course out on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. Later.